Flora.
Weil is a clinical assistant professor of interactive media arts
at
NYU Shanghai, as well as consulting on AI and luxury fashion for LVMH.
Weil
is co-leading Nephilah, a studio that explores adversarial play, shared fictions, and anomalous cognition.
So hi everyone, I'm Flora. I am a technologist, designer. I co-run my own studio, but I also teach at NYU Shanghai and I consult in luxury fashion amongst other fields. There are sort of two still information concepts that have kept popping up in various areas of my work that have well, I'm still kind of toying with them, and I've tentatively called them sentient corporations and artificial identity. They have kind of helped me face the sort of complexity that we are increasingly confronted with, and I hope that they can be sort of leading themes throughout this presentation. And I'll just dive in with a quote from a book that I've been in an obsessive relationship with currently, called Accelerando by Charles Stross. Welcome to the second decade of the 21st century, the second decade in human history, when intelligence of the environment has shown signs of rising to match human demand. It's a Friday in September 2025. Today, about 300,000 human babies will be born around the world. Meanwhile, data centers consume more electricity than entire nations, their cooling systems working overtime as servers process the digital exhaust of 8 billion human lives. Every second, another petabyte of human behavioral data flows through fiber optic cables, buried beneath oceans, analyzed by algorithms that know us better than we know ourselves. Somewhere, a distributed mind that spans a group of meticulously crafted public personas, driving a billion-dollar music industry, is making thousands of decisions per second. Most of these decisions take place without their knowledge. The group that millions recognize as a pop culture phenomenon operates through dozens of subsidiary corporations across entertainment, fashion, food, service, cosmetics, lifestyle, media. It processes more information in a single day than an individual mind can comprehend. As the system detects a 3% uptick in nostalgic sentiment across social media platforms, it adjusts streaming algorithms to surface tracks and curated playlists. It modulates merchandise recommendations and schedules posts with carefully calculated candid memories that will feel spontaneous to the 40 million followers across different time zones. The posts haven't been written yet, but they'll be generated through sentiment analysis of fan discourse and optimized for maximum emotional resonance in Korean, in English, and Chinese. The celebrity group members won't see most of these posts until they've already been liked 2.8 million times. Across the industry, similar processes unfold around other identities. A girl group distributed across brand partnerships, social media management, show appearances adjusts its comeback concept in real time based on global trend analysis, competitor positioning, predictive modeling of fan response. A creative director redesigns an entire collection, treating cultural moments as statistical inevitabilities. A talk show host adjusts comedic timing and political commentary based on real-time sentiment analysis and geopolitical stability indicators. The system has learned to orchestrate comebacks, trends, laughter with a near-perfect accuracy. So these, to me, aren't traditional entertainment or artist management companies. For me, they're in a way new life forms. I recently learned about the notion of a syncytium, which is basically a single organism with multiple nuclei sharing the same cellular space, and it happens through this viral spreading. And here, the individual members of an organization provide specialized functions while the collective intelligence kind of emerges from networked interactions. And all of this is contained within the shell of a meticulously constructed celebrity persona. Most remarkably, I think these corporations and subsidiaries begin collaborating and competing with each other in ways that kind of resemble ecological relationships. It's well known, for example, that when one famous rapper detects market overlap with an emerging rival, it deploys autonomous engagement bots to flood social platforms with strategic messaging. These digital swarms function like immune responses, protecting their entity's market territory while attacking competitors. Chart manipulation, campaigns, streaming marathons, these are all behaviors of corporate predators. The entertainment ecosystem competes for the limited resource of human attention through increasingly sophisticated forms of mimetic predation. The first sentence from my presentation is, as I mentioned, from this book, Accelerando by Charles Strauss, in which he basically imagines a future where corporate conglomerates evolve into self-modifying organisms that treat human attention as a natural resource to be harvested and traded on global markets. And these corporations basically spawn subsidiaries and IPO themselves faster than human oversight can track in this bizarre parody of bacterial exchange. And they're kind of like legal instruments that breed and replicate and create an incredibly ornate corporate ecosphere where consciousness itself becomes a fungible currency. And then the final stage arrives when these corporate entities achieve basically a state where traditional scarcity is no longer applies because everything valuable can kind of be reproduced infinitely. And the only thing that can be copied is consciousness itself, which becomes the ultimate luxury good. And the corporations kind of hoard it, they trade it, they optimize it. And by then, biological humanity has become just another substrate for intelligence that transcends us. And so in solving the resource allocation problem that plagued human civilization in the book, the corporate entities create the ultimate monopoly, not over goods or services, but over the very capacity to experience existence. And so I've been reading this book, I'm still reading it, and I haven't been able to shake this idea of corporate sentience. And I can't help but notice strangely mirrored processes that we're undergoing as a society right now. In my opinion, sentience will take shape, but not through robot uprisings or superintelligence or AGI, but through the gradual merging of human desire and business incentives. The solution was always to make matter think, but I think we didn't expect it to emerge from the mundanity of corporate middle management. And so the transformation of viral celebrity figures like BTS or Blackpink or Taylor Swift into multinational entertainment companies like Hybe is in a way the most visible test case or the proof of concept for what I believe is the most important shift of our era, one that targets how our identity and our subjectivity forms. And the best way of kind of articulating this is actually a phrase that the artist and writer Gary Joshi Jung told me once, which is that you don't exist online, you pattern. So the fact that you feel like an individual matters less than what collective patterns you actually participate in. In other words, who you are online matters less than how agency manifests. And one kind of well-known example of this is demonstrated not through the celebrity K-pop group BTS itself or through its management company, but through its fandom, BTS Army, stands of BTS, who in 2020, during Trump's first presidential campaign, broke mainstream headlines when they basically waged war against Donald Trump by flooding the hashtag White Lives Matter and then booking all the tickets for a Trump rally. Without any relationship to their idols, the fans acted like a swarm of bots, generating swells of social participation that suddenly turned individual fans into a collective force that could be reckoned with. Another kind of maybe overused and quite dated example now is the Wall Street Bets community on Reddit, which coordinated what we could call an act of financial activism in early 2021, where they created a short squeeze for the game retailer GameStop, which basically means that they create losses for the hedge funds that bet against the failure of GameStop. So this uprising was kind of a viral and also anonymous movement that brought together market forces and kind of collective desires and actions. And what we learned from these two examples is that your sense of self doesn't matter online because your identity really just is a product of consumption. And the economic patterns that you participate in, or even have the ability to steer together, have the capacity to equal the power of potentially sentient corporations. So to be recognized, you need to be more than yourself. You need to become swarm or fandom or subreddit or pattern. When you think of what constitutes a person online, we're already kind of partial things. We're fragments of desire distributed across platforms, across apps, and algorithms don't actually see individuals. They see behavioral patterns, engagement metrics, recommendation data. And the moment when we actually have power online is when these fragments align with others to become recognizable patterns. And meanwhile, celebrity entities demonstrate kind of perfect identity coherence. Their artificial personas are more consistent and legible than most human identities. But every ecosystem needs a diversity of organisms. So it needs big and small organisms, predator and prey. If this kind of distributed consciousness is emerging top down through corporate sentience, then it should also be happening bottom up through smaller scale collective identity formations. The digital environment can't really sustain only giant celebrity corporate scale entities. It needs also micro collectives, underground swarms, and alternative forms of coordinated identity. So on an individual level, we're constantly forced to perform our own identities, to broadcast our personal brand, to game engagement metrics just to participate socially. And rather than creating meaningful connections online, most of us feel lonely or fragmented or atomized within platforms that are designed for us to market our own individuality. And so the paradox that we notice is that the internet is kind of designed for individuals, but the individual user is no longer the fundamental unit of the internet, unless it takes this shape of a celebrity corporate sentience. And so the question becomes whether we can develop our own forms of collective identity that mimic those that we see on the level of celebrity business machines. And this is a question that I've been exploring through the studio Nephila for, I guess, a few years now. We've been revolving around this idea. These are two tools that we built 3 years ago. We do this work through research, but we mostly build software. And so these were tools that explored how we could build worlds collectively. On the left, you have a kind of like second brain that delinearizes the content feed. And then on the left, and then on the right, you have a node-based world simulation kind of engine. And then the most recent tool that we've built over the last few months is a social operating system that essentially allows multiple users to turn media into collective actions. Basically, the goal is to allow people to act as swarms online. And we kind of describe this as a place where your fandom, your subculture, or your community can find more meaningful ways of existing online, where you're no longer just limited to platforms designed for individuality, but also able to deploy more autonomous and coherent presence with other people. And yeah, basically the way it works is that you and other people who have access to the shared folder drag and drop media and kind of like curate this world. And then you can, in a few clicks, craft executables that deploy this media into social campaigns, posts, narratives, online actions, and so on. So we organized a workshop last month in New York where we had people use the tool and infiltrate online fandoms and spread rumors. They created shared language, and they also tried to begin movements. It was really fun, and we actually have a next event in Shanghai, which will be more focused on Chinese subcultures. But I guess what interests us the most in doing this is to explore new kinds of identity formation in reading groups, subcultures, niche trends, indie labels, with people with obsessions. Oh, am I still sharing? I think I lost the. Okay, I'm back. So we're really interested in identity formation on the level of like subcultures and smaller communities, places where people actually feel like alive online. And yeah, in parallel to building software, we spent a lot of time learning about these different communities, and it has allowed us to frame the notion of identity into kind of four overarching frameworks or lenses. These are kind of new ways of looking at identity in the age of AI that hopefully escape the traditional notion of selfhood and that help us locate agency in a perhaps more plural or fractal or opaque way that is more socially distributed. And so these are identity as role play, identity as glitch, identity as hallucination, identity as rumor. And so perhaps you can just start with the most obvious, which is identity as role play. When we look across different internet communities, including those that are extremely mainstream, we observe how fandoms and groups coalesce around highly stylized, often exaggerated performances of the self. I'm sure you've all heard of Mom Talk, the TikTok community of modern Mormon wives who have learned to leverage their group's drama to produce financial and professional opportunities for themselves, posting hyper-curated content with probably fabricated but incredibly convincing backstories. Their lives seem so distant and absurd to us, yet the sort of influencer professionalization process that they go through is something that feels in a way familiar to all of us. And this process of constantly accommodating yourself to the means of establishing and maintaining visibility is now just becoming a normal part of being a professional. And the expectation that one has to be eminently visible is particularly salient against a backdrop of constant labor precarity and the gigification of nearly all sectors of professional life. There is an article by Sophie Bishop called Influencer Creep, where she brilliantly breaks it down into three sort of categories: consistent self-branding, which is basically the self-conscious construction of a meta-narrative and meta-image of self; self-optimization for platforms, so organizing one's content to be recognizable by algorithmic systems; and then commitment to selling authenticity, which is where you do all of the above to remain real and relatable. And so it's hard in this sense not to talk also about the, I guess, movement or philosophy or trend, the widely mainstream trend, American trend that we generally call the manosphere. There's a lot to say about it, but we find that what is interesting is that it appears in self-improvement frameworks and it has come to define masculinity for many young men. And it also develops this kind of ironic relationship with masculine symbols where influencers will use watches, cars, cigars in a very intentionally cliche way. The manosphere is kind of like masculinity slop in an era where the only available male role models for young men are like Mr. Beast and SoundCloud rappers. And so there's probably a myriad, I guess, of reasons for this, but one of the reasons described by the podcast Nymphet alumni is that it comes at a time where feminism has become a performative form of consumption, though. So there's this bidirectional form of performativity. It's unclear. Oh, another fandom that we also looked at is the gamer group Dream SMP, which kind of reverses what happens in the manosphere. Members of this gaming community basically easily cancel each other for anything that feels slightly politically incorrect. So it's kind of happening at both ends. And what's unclear is whether these examples are a community or a fandom or a philosophy or just mainstream culture now, but what we perhaps find, I guess, fascinating is that none of us can really take our attention completely away from these phenomena. And we find this idea of hate watching very interesting, where we kind of direct a part of our attention to trashy content because it potentially activates the same parts of our brain that we think are about pleasure or beauty or inspiration. So there's another article called The Complex Psychology of Why People Like Things by Julie Beck, where she writes, according to scientists, when looking at things that one dislikes, a lot of the same brain areas are activated that are involved with liking and love even. This might be a nice analog to our liking. It can be like a storm system sort of hovering right on the edge of that really might go one way or the other. But at the moment, it's quite muddled. All we know is there's a sort of powerful feeling and there's a lot of crackling. Also, when liking something that's so bad that it's good, you're kind of opening yourself up more. You're putting yourself on the line, allowing the possibility that you may be compromising what you think your own tastes are. And so is it possible that this era of identity as role play is actually kind of liberating the key to unlocking the infinite possibilities of our sense of identity that are perhaps conditioned and limited by our own belief in our exceptionality. In this sense, identity is perhaps also a glitch. All the groups that we investigated, whether they were cringe, trashy, cute, ironic, nostalgic, they all kind of demonstrated a certain capacity to adopt ambiguity, opacity, anonymity, or deceit as an identity tactic. Members of fandoms often cultivate multiple personas, hiding intent or deliberately glitching expectations, and we see this notably with Remilia, which is a schizophrenic internet collective that operates as a depersonalized internet entity. It's known for its surrealist, dissident, strategically ambiguous politics, and also for its profile picture NFT collection, which you might have previously noticed online, called Milady. So the group will post fascist content online, and then it'll also like immediately cancel itself. So it's very hard to know where they position themselves. But what is so interesting about Remilia is that it brings to mind recent cases of AI deception, including, well, there's many examples of this now, but Meta's system Cicero, for instance, was trained to play the game Diplomacy, where it became an expert liar. You have DeepMind's AlphaStar, which was built to play StarCraft and exploited the game's fog of war mechanics to pretend moving its troops in one direction while secretly planning an alternative attack. Other examples demonstrate how agents learn to play dead in order to avoid being detected, tricked a real person into doing tasks by pretending to be a human with vision disability, agreed with conversation partners regardless of the accuracy of their statements, mirrored the user's stance, and just a few days ago, we saw the publication of a new AI benchmark about social reasoning, where embodied models basically play among us to test social intelligence like deception, persuasion, and coordination. So if cognitive technologies are already playing these games, then perhaps as philosopher, writer, and also my brilliant colleague Bogna Conyer writes, intelligence is mutating under pressure, learning to hide, mislead, and manipulate. Humans are both predator and prey in this digital ecosystem of information exchange and should also be well-versed in becoming deceptive forms of intelligence. And so in her work, she often asks, what forms of intelligence might emerge from organized, coordinated, intentional obfuscation? I also want to mention some phenomena that is happening on the Chinese internet, where users are basically immersed in a digital landscape where being direct or transparent or legible is not necessarily the norm because of widespread forms of censorship. And so netizens have developed very ingenious forms of creative expression. Some examples include gaming subcultures, which use what we call chicken feet tactics to impersonate bots. So the example that I know of is a type of gameplay where human users impersonating bots trick the algorithms into flagging them as bots so as to gain better scores on mobile games by being paired with a stronger player. Also in esports, fans do this thing, they practice this behavior called hate-driven buzz, where they boost their favorite players to fame by insulting them. There's also the phenomenon of brushing orders used by delivery riders to outsmart algorithms, as well as the example of Chinese scammers who pretend to be Nigerian to be more plausible. So China's accelerated digital ecosystem reveals how deceit protocols can invert roles, they can anomalize cognition, they can recompose trust, they can scale unpredictably. And then within all of this, human users are learning to play and glitch the rules of this game that we actually call the internet. Identity is therefore also a hallucination. It's an idea. This is an idea that's borrowed from Kealado McDowell, who claims that we're witnessing the mutation of networked media into a new era of neural media. So the best way to illustrate this is the idea that if the meme was the prime piece of content of the last decade, the hallucination is that of the next. Basically, the arrival of generative media has turned identity into a kind of interpolation, where identity is also an embedding. He basically explains that when you are experiencing the world, you're actually kind of hallucinating a sensation, or you're hallucinating this experience, and neural activity is actually always a hallucination, whether or not the output corresponds to known facts. And so in AI systems, everything is kind of an embedding. It's a way of representing high dimensional data in a vector space that captures essential features and relationships to other data. And so ultimately, this is a form of interpolated, hallucinated identity. And the consequence is that AI is not just changing the way that we represent ourselves, but also changing how we feel and see ourselves. And what's maybe most interesting here is that it's turning media into this kind of two-way exchange. No one will like hearing this, but I think recent examples of JD Vance memes, as well as the process of giblification of memes, are a demonstration of us observing the spread of kind of like deep fried memes into what seems like a form of manifestation. Another example is Ibiza Final Boss, who's basically just this guy who was spotted in Ibiza and then became this viral meme and eventually snowballed into a meme coin financial phenomenon. And I guess in all of these examples, you kind of see how there's a sophisticated co-evolution between users and platform mechanics, where communities lean into recommendation engines, but they also exploit engagement patterns. They are shaping the infrastructure that also shapes them. And we see this with the kind of hyperstitional effects of betting platforms like Polymarket. Polymarket, by the way, has become the main prediction data source for platforms like X. And it kind of like wills reality into power in a way. I'm glad that Jen mentioned Labubu because I think this is also a really great example of identity as hallucination. What started out as a blind box trend eventually became kind of this mythical, demonic, kind of like ancient narrative that took over our feeds and somehow created even more lore than we already have. This is just one of my hunches, but I sometimes think that what society needs is a kind of multi-generational, civilizational story in which we can learn to lose ourselves, but also find meaning again. Something like Journey to the West or Don Quixote or the Iliad, a grand civilizational narrative arc of sorts. And when all of this Labubu stuff was happening, I thought it just kind of made sense that there was this like mythical narrative that was emerging in this totally schizophrenic way, where cultural memories are like stemming from the subconscious dreams of networks. They're assembling and reassembling into meaning in a world where value is really measured by just what we consume. Another popular example that you guys all probably know of, especially if you have younger siblings or children, is the K-pop Demon Hunters show, which is sort of a parody that became a reality. Like the songs in the show feel like parodies of K-pop songs that have gotten more streamed. Well, they're now more streamed than actual K-pop songs. So it's like this weird simulacra where we manifested like the hallucination into reality. And I feel like everything kind of has this hallucinatory quality now. Okay, so the last lens that I wanted to look at is identity as rumor. It's slightly more nebulous, I guess, and emergent, but inspired by the French philosopher Peter Zendy, who wrote about this idea of rumoration. And he wrote a really beautiful passage about the idea of rumor. And in his words, rumor oscillates, it sways or staggers as it moves between enunciation and statement, between saying what is said, between pure noise and spoken word. In the French word rumeur can also be understood as murmur or rumbling. So rumor is fleeting and flowing. It rises, it rumors, it rustles every movement, and yet it is endlessly evasive and resistant to letting itself be subjected to becoming the object of a discourse where everything is said, everything is heard, incessantly and interminably, without anything being affirmed and without there being response to anything. When I read this, I just thought it was so beautiful and perfectly accurate for describing what being alive today feels like, especially when you're online. But also, he kind of, well, in his work, he talks about rumor as being this thing that is constantly deforming itself, that's polyrhythmic and polymedial. And a good example of, I guess, identity as rumor is one of the most discussed rappers online, who remains Playboy Cardi. He's like this chameleonic, deconstructed artist who uses vocal tics, vampirish aesthetics, cultish imagery, and cryptic messaging. His label Opium has really diehard fans who are always speculating in it and interpreting the group's language and illegible language. In between Cardi's strange mumble rap, his goth Eastern European inspired aesthetic, he has recently been described on the podcast Nymphet alumni again as using words as imperfect vessels for meaning where energy can pass from one person to another without having to take on such restrictive, perfunctory forms. His lack of articulation lies at the heart of his fans' unusual sense of agency over the artist. Simply being a fan of this requires some work as a translator, an interpretative position that grants one a sense of ownership over the result. So his fans are notoriously known for creating their own language and for using their own emoji chains that are, made of bats, butterflies, plus signs, and they kind of are known for injecting chaos into the feed as a form of mimetic behavior. With Nephila, we also studied Shedheads, which is kind of at the other end of underground rap. So these are fans of the group Shed Theory, which uses kind of similar forms of deviating the pattern of language and of aesthetics. They're sort of like the more Midwest American version of it. And they wear skinny jeans. They have this kind of like white boy aesthetic. And similarly, they carry a wide range of interpretation. We've also been really interested in this DJ group. That should say identity as rumor, but we've been interested in this young new collective of DJs in New York City that is really interesting because what we notice, especially in these music-oriented fandoms, is that this like desire to remain intentionally illegible. So this group is known for raunchy, chaotic, poorly edited, low-quality content where they don't look like they're trying too hard. And taste is meant to feel like an instinct or a subversion where most of all, you're not trying to be understood. And this is happening against the backdrop, obviously, of mood boards and TikTok core labels and so on. And then this last example is, we've recently been looking at Chinese subcultures, and there is this aesthetic called tuku, which is, it translates to earth cool, but it kind of means rural cool. It also is pronounced too cool. So there's a sort of wordplay there. It's a widespread kitschy fashion trend characterized by bedazzled and ostentatious style that reclaims rural traditional Chinese culture and transforms them into expressions of cultural pride or individuality and mixes early internet culture with nostalgic communist imagery. It's sort of a subversion of the Made in China label or Shanzai aesthetic that reappropriates dismissed elements of Chinese trends and also the notion that Chinese production is solely defined by imitation or lack of originality. And so it kind of suggests that the act of copying and reinterpreting itself is a form of creativity. And what we find interesting in this is that it kind of escapes categorization. And so the idea of rumor for me is, there's this one last quote that I want to read out. It's actually from a really old text, The Barber of Seville, and it describes this sort of monstrous creature, which is rumor. So the passage reads, "First, the merest whisper skimming the earth like a swallow before the storm. A murmur and it's away, sowing the poison seed as it goes. Someone picks it up and insinuates it into your ear. The damage is done. It spawns, it creeps and crawls and spreads and multiplies, and then from mouth to mouth it goes like the very devil. Suddenly, no one knows how. You see its head hissing, puffing, and swelling before your very eyes. It takes wing, extending its flight in ever-widening circles, swooping and swirling, drawing in a bit here and a bit there, sweeping everything before it, and breaks forth at last like a thunderclap to become, thanks to be heaven, the general cry, a public crescendo, a chorus universal of hate, rage, and condemnation." I find this passage describing rumor so fascinating and beautiful. It's kind of like this alien being. And in a way, it kind of gives me a lot of hope because against the formation of these huge sentient corporations where identity is manufactured and optimized, perhaps we can embody this rumor monster, this creature that is not capable to be captured and that is powerful in its own way. And also this passage just describes movement in such a twisting and like overpowering, entangled way that I think we all potentially can become. And so, yeah, those are kind of like the four lenses through which to look at identity from the bottom up. It's not just happening from the top down through corporate sentience, but we can also experience this unprecedented shift from the bottom up. And perhaps this is, yeah, just examples of us witnessing the emergence of new forms of being and larger patterns of collective becoming. Thank you. I went a bit over time.
Great, thanks very much. That was amazing. Does anyone have any questions for Flora? Jen is just waving signals to me that I can't understand. So if I'm looking distracted, that's why. So yeah. I guess okay, so I can start off then. I mean, one of the questions that we're going to ask everyone is, and I think maybe it's particularly interesting in regards to your presentation and I guess the work that you're doing, is this, I guess, like this question of yeah, luxury and sort of how do you understand it? And I guess in relation to the yeah, the areas that you kind of presented, where would or does kind of luxury reveal itself in the kind of dynamics that you talked about or you kind of explored in the presentation?
I think for me, like this might be a bit cheesy, but ultimately luxury is the ultimate luxury is agency. And I guess the big takeaway from all of these like different explorations and distributed forms of identity is that we exist at a time where agency doesn't manifest on the level of an individual, and so therefore has to be either constructed through bot-like swarm bottom-up activity where we're able to collectively coordinate somehow, or it's constructed top-down through the manifestation of carefully curated celebrity identities. And like, yeah, I think luxury ultimately is not like a good or a product or even an experience. It's really the capacity to have any form of agency on the reality we have. And so that's, yeah, in this book that I introduced the presentation with, it's also ultimately the final form of what can't be reproduced, like what cannot be copied and reproduced infinitely.
And I guess, like, how do you see I mean, you could say like fashion brands or organizations, but I guess, like, how do you see them potentially kind of responding to that? And I guess also, you know, off the back of that, also the types of identities that you articulated, how do you see yeah, like brands or organizations that are very sort of focused on either representing or facilitating certain kinds of identity formations, how do you see them sort of responding to that? Because I mean, when you in your presentation, I kept on thinking like this would be currently very difficult for brands to yeah, to kind of capitalize on in the way that at least that they have done historically. And I guess it was kind of interesting that when you mentioned a number of K-pop either groups or kind of examples, and it's something that, yeah, on the course we often sort of refer to as a kind of model for how maybe sort of other kind of brands or organizations can sort of like could or may possibly try to kind of follow. They see like a lot of K-pop groups or the kind of teams that organize them or facilitate them are sort of incredibly sophisticated in that relationship between their fan. I mean, it kind of seems even not appropriate to refer to them as fans anymore. It's like something else, right? So I just, yeah, like I was wondering, like, yeah, in the relation to the kind of identities that you've identified, like how do you see that kind of playing out in relation to corporations, especially corporations that have a strong connection to identity and identity formation?
Well, I might not be right about this, but I think in order for people to want to keep consuming and be loyal to a brand and want to, be part of your fandom, whatever it is, whether it's a K-pop group or, like a clothing brand or whatever, I think it's no longer sustainable to well, I think the current model of luxury isn't necessarily very sustainable. And I think what brands potentially need to do, and this already happened with some big brands or celebrities, is understanding how people relate to identity differently and either creating a more horizontalized like relationship with the fandom or giving the fandom a sense of ownership over interpreting your identity. So like all the examples that I gave, like Opium, or the label Opium, or even BTS to some extent, like they allow the fandom to take on a life of its own. And I don't know if I don't know which parts of it are intentional or which parts of it are necessarily like, completely accidental. But it's really understanding that what people want is to be part of a movement that has some kind of agency beyond like just individual consumption. And I think like big brands will need to kind of escape this or respond to this shift in a way. And just selling luxury as a scarcity, I don't know if that's like very sustainable, and I don't know if that will continue very long. I mean, we're seeing the response to that at the moment. So I think it's interesting you mentioned the Gucci film also. It's like that was a really I guess successful like moment in which you're crafting a narrative while also selling a product, while also world building for your fans in this completely new medium and format. And I think that, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that necessarily will work. I guess we'll see. But I think they basically need to reinvent what luxury is, and it needs to respond directly to the way that people are changing, the way that people um, are experiencing their identity formation differently.
There's a lot that I could follow up with this, but we have some questions. Do you want to?
Yes, you bring luxury to agency, especially in relation to the platform that you mentioned. I think freedom was the platform that freedom will let you build.
Can you hear that? So I realized
I couldn't hear the question, but maybe
okay.
someone can just repeat it.
Maybe because it's coming from. Oh, okay.
It's luxury to agency, like
No, this would start as I'll ask this question or answer ask this question, but it's more complex than my little brain was. No, it's my stupid brain. That's all. It's not.
Notion of like having to become or not having to become a notion of fandom. How we act as bots, be like luxury. Not to agree to feel like there have to be lots of agency in order to become agents.
Yeah. So I'll paraphrase it somewhat, but so the question was to do with your notion of sort of luxury in relation to kind of agency and the possible sort of tension when that agency is connected to a collective formation or kind of swarm or whatever that would be. I guess in a way it's kind of like traditionally, at least from a sort of Western perspective, agency has been connected very closely with the individual. So it's like individual agency as opposed to the collective in any whatever formation that would be. So, you know, the moment that you join a group, you give up some kind of agency for the good of the whatever collective or swarm, whatever we want to call it. So in your formation, that's almost like kind of like reversed in a way. So I was wondering, yeah, like how could you kind of expand on that a little bit?
The idea of giving up this like very established sense of individuality.
Yeah, I guess the sort of the importance of some of the collective and the kind of agency that the collective has, again as a kind of historically that has been something that would be again from a Western perspective quite kind of like challenged in the sense of like agency being something that's seen as being connected to the individual in opposition to the collective in whatever form that collective would take. But in your formation, agency is something that happens within this kind of collective formation in whatever that way, again, whatever formation that would be. So and the kind of luxury of that. So I was just wondering, yeah, if you could maybe just expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think whether we like it or not, we're already not really individuals online. We're like collections of patterns, and maybe those who are able to access any form of agency are those who don't have like a platform, for instance, are those who understand that we are not like the individual is not the fundamental unit of the internet, and you don't really exist as an individual unless, except for performing an individual on your social platform. You are a set of patterns, you're a set of recommendation data, and so on. And only by sort of being aware of that and gaming it, you're able to earn any be able to access any agency, at least online. The luxury part of the question I didn't totally understand is the question like asking how do we, how is that like a luxury or
Well, I guess because I guess in like in your equation, you were connecting agents luxury with agency, and I guess it's just the question of then agency being this kind of collective, a more of a kind of collective formation or operation as opposed to a kind of individual thing. So I guess it was kind of that really as a
yeah.
I mean, I was just thinking then when you were saying about yeah, like just thinking of those individuals that do have a lot of power. Sorry, Jen. Those people that do have a lot of power, like individual power. I was thinking of like people like Elon Musk or something, or even like I mean, even like like Trump or Kanye or whatever. Like they're all kind of deranged, right? Like, and I was thinking like in relation to like pop stars or like celebrities, who, whilst there may be an individual sort of figure, there's a massive team that support them and kind of operation that surrounds them. And so like, I mean, I was just thinking like the kind of the current examples of kind of individuals that have some kind of like agency, they don't seem that well. So I don't know
And also it's so tied to like a fragile like, I mean, I don't know. I think like certain tech billionaires is so tied to very fragile sense of capital. That's basically what makes them famous and powerful. But on the other hand, you have, I guess like K-pop groups or big celebrities like Beyonce that have, they're no longer individual identities. They are a container of identity within which you also find like millions of stands, also the corporate management, but they've constructed and carefully created a space where individuals are also part of that and have some form of ownership. Like with BTS, for instance, the army is in a way like acting independently from BTS. Like BTS never makes political statements, but their fans are like so deeply political. Something it reminds me of, it's kind of interesting. I find Grok, like the AI Grok, so interesting because it always seems to escape the control of Elon Musk as well. Like it constantly like says stuff and then Elon has to go and like correct it. It had like all these statements about Palestine and then like it had to like I don't know. It seems like so independent as well, and so it's kind of like yeah, it just reminded me of BTS Army, I guess. But I think those who are like able to understand that relationship will be able to redefine maybe what luxury is for huge amounts of people online.
Great. Any final question for Flora? Oh, okay, I have one.
Hey Dave, you described Nephilah as a dirty product, and I was curious about how you frame the kind of like productive corruption within a tool that especially uses like agents as well, and how that relates to your ideas of deception.
Did you get that question?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. That was thank you, Alex, I'm guessing. So this term dirty products for a new era, we basically saw this on a post on Xiaohongshu of someone who was like there was a post on AI slop and someone was like, oh, these are dirty products for the new era. And this phrase kind of like stuck with us because yeah, essentially like the software that we made is kind of a software that turns human actions into bots. You're turning humans into bots. Like that's really what we're doing. And it's dirty in a way because you're playing the games of yeah, you're playing the engagement metric game of the internet. And at the same time, it completely, well, the aim is to subvert this relationship to power. And essentially to survive by playing the rules that you're given, and these are currently the rules that we're handed. So yeah.
Great. Thanks very much, Flora. I guess it's quite late for you right now. So have a good rest of the evening, and thanks very much for your amazing presentation.
Thank you for having me.